Sal Di Stefano is he runs MindPumpMedia with Adam, Justin, and Doug, and these guys have really kind of changed the game for me in a sense. So it was the first podcast I ever listened to was MindPumpMedia. Would have been about maybe around about 2 years ago. So I'm one of the veterans, one of the Mind Pump mafia now, I think. Yeah. Is that right, Sal?
That's it. That's right. You've been on. That's why I've been. So we've been talking a while because you were a listener for a long time ago, and I remember you messaged me early on because I think some of the stuff we were saying, you were like, "Man, this is so opposite of what everybody else is telling me to do."
Absolutely, and I was going to come to that as well. Yeah. So they helped me evolve into, well, just to break it down into a happier, healthier human, but also. Yeah, it's just, I don't know what the right word is. Maybe unconventional was the message, but the message was just what I needed to hear at that time. It's health. It's make health a priority. The most effective ways to train. Different tools you could use as well, like intermittent fasting and whatnot. But more importantly, it just helped me develop. I think above all, MindPump helped me develop a really healthy relationship with food, and made me put health a priority, and therefore rather than chasing the aesthetics and the image that I was searching for, the delusional image, because obviously from doing all the fitness competitions and working my way up to the pro level, I had to do a lot of different kind of had to restrict my calories and diet down for shows and stuff, and my relationship with food wasn't the best. I developed, I would say like a borderline eating disorder, really. But I came out of that really fast after listening to MindPump and applying the tips and just absorbing the information that I was getting from the podcast. So yeah, they've helped me evolve both as a trainer and as an individual. So this is going to be awesome. So I'm really excited for this. And you ready to roll, Sal?
Oh yeah, I'm ready to go, man.
Sal's always ready, raring to go. The first question I had for you, Sal, because as we were just saying then, your message is kind of like the opposite to what a lot of people have gathered from the information they've picked up from the internet and different sources such as YouTube and whatnot. Because we live in a day and age where we have more information available to us than ever, but we also are inundated with a lot of stuff which just is incorrect and is misleading people. So your message is very much the opposite, because I used to eat kind of 6 to 8 times a day because I was worried about losing muscle, and I was constantly chasing the aesthetics and stuff. But your message is just look after yourself, and the ways, your training programs, for example. The first thing I did, the first program I did of yours was Red Maps, and that was so transformative for me because completely different concepts. Anyway, before I go off onto a tangent, I was going to ask you what kind of difficulties and resistance have you faced, whilst trying to spread kind of the opposite message, to most people in the fitness industry.
Well, early on, so when we started the podcast, Mind Pump, me and my co-hosts have been in fitness for a long time. I've been doing this for about 20 years, and in that period of time, I've mainly trained a lot of trainers and have trained a lot of clients. So I've taught people what they need to do. And the same is true for both Adam and Justin. And we have a real passion for people. And if you do this long enough and you really have a passion for people, and if you're open-minded, you start to realize that some things are accurate and other things are false in terms of the fitness information that we're being fed or that we learn through, whether it be social media, magazines. When I was a kid, I used to read a lot of magazines, bodybuilding magazines and fitness magazines, or websites. And you start to see that there's some things that work and a lot of things that don't. And if you really like people, you're honest with yourself, it's you can make that transition. If you're not, then you end up sticking to the same old song and dance, and you don't ever really get people where they want to go. So a lot of our first messages or early messages were based on that. We would come out with episodes and we'd say things like, if you don't eat every 2 or 3 hours, you're not going to lose muscle, you're not going to gain body fat. In fact, that is a complete myth. It's based on zero science. There's no evidence supporting eating small meals throughout the day. It's sold to you because once you believe that myth, it's easy then to sell you a meal replacement or a protein powder or a bar, because if you believe you need to eat 6 meals a day and you have a regular life like most people and it's, busy, the likelihood that you're going to have to replace some of those meals with something that comes in a wrapper is very high. And so, that information was pushed out to sell products. People believed it. I believed it so much that I taught it. And when we challenged it and we looked at the science and we saw that it wasn't supported by anything, and in fact, under the wrong context, eating small meals is actually pro-inflammatory and may do the opposite. We talked about that on the show, and we got pushback initially. We had bodybuilders would push back, and we talked a lot about supplement companies and how many of them have poor integrity, and how a lot of what they say is bullshit, and the products simply not only do they not work, but they probably are not good for you. And we did get pushback initially. We got pushback from the CrossFit community when we came out against a lot of the intensity-based kind of programming. We actually, I don't know if I ever told this on the show, but I did tell this on the show a long time ago. But the CrossFit headquarters actually sent us a message and told us to not say that their training methodologies were dangerous. And so we actually recorded a second episode that went even harder in the direction that we had originally done. And I remember that. Yeah. We've gotten a lot of pushback along the way, but it doesn't stop us. It kind of increases our resolve or strengthens our message a little bit, because now we want to dig our heels in a little more. A lot of it is, for me personally, I was a kid, when I was lifting weights as a kid, a skinny kid trying to build muscle, I fell for a lot of those bullshit myths, and I believed them, and I bought a lot of supplements, and I did a lot of things to my body that weren't great. And as I got older and learned that a lot of that stuff was bullshit, I was angry, and I was like, look, people need to tell. I want to tell other kids trying to build muscle that these things are false. But over time, that pushback has dwindled and died. Nobody gives us pushback anymore. Part of the reason is I think the fitness industry is moving in the direction that, MindPump has been in since day one, which is the merging of real health, fitness, and performance. So it's not now just about how you look. It's also about health and wellness, and people are realizing that they actually complement each other. And the other part is we are not afraid of, we'll never back down from a fight. So there's been a few times we've had pushback, and we've pushed back even harder, and it didn't work out so well for the other guy. Part of it is we have truth on our side. The other part of it is we're entertaining. So if I'm going to talk about you, I'm going to do it in an entertaining way. So I'm going to get a lot more listeners. And people might be afraid now to push back a little bit, but
adds fuel to the fire now, doesn't it? Really,
it does. I'm glad. Hey, look, I tell you what, I'm really happy to see more people going in that direction, because, like we talk about on the show all the time, fitness needs to be the answer to the health epidemic. It doesn't need. I don't want it to be the problem or part of the problem anymore, like it has been for too long now.
Great. So there we go. So on that note, then, that means I can just go straight into one of my questions relating to that. So I wanted you to just break down for the listeners exactly what a carbohydrate is, okay? Because I try and explain it, but I'm sure you'll be able to break it down a bit better for them. So on the note you were saying then, we are living in a day and age now where we're actually facing an epidemic, an obesity epidemic, chronic illnesses and whatnot. And it's really alarming because it's moving at a fast rate. So I know there's more to it than carbohydrates, a lot more to it than that, overeating, lifestyle, loads of different things come into it. But I just thought I would just clear this one up now. So can you explain to the listeners what a carbohydrate is, and there are different types, and why overeating? I know overeating calories in general can lead to chronic illnesses and all these things, but why does overeating carbs? Because overeating carbs can cause insulin resistance and then lead on to diabetes. And I listened to a Joe Rogan episode recently with Chris Kresser, who you've had on your show before. Is that right?
Right.
And I remember him saying, and I was actually blown away by the stats. I know it was an epidemic and we were facing some tough times, but I didn't quite realize the extent of it. And he said around about 1/3 of America, so that's about 100 million Americans, diabetic or pre-diabetic. So with pre-diabetic, I think on average, they have diabetes or pre-diabetes. And I think with pre-diabetes, I think it takes on average about 5 years to progress into full-blown diabetes. And also, he said something like half the nation, half of America are obese. It works out now, roughly around about 50% or something like that anyway. And also talking about, a crisis, with the financial side of it, I think it costs on average around $14,000 a year to treat people with diabetes. So you were saying then, the answer to health is, fitness plays a huge part in that, and obviously nutrition and all the rest of it. But yeah, if you could just give me your insight into what a carbohydrate is and maybe whatever else you've got to offer me.
Well, Western medicine does a very good job of treating acute health issues. So if you have a heart attack, if you if one of your arteries looks like it's about to become totally clogged, if you have an infection, you break a bone, you need surgery, Western medicine is king by far. It's the best the world has ever seen. It has solved a lot of the issues that have plagued mankind for millennia. On that note, Western medicine is terrible with dealing with chronic issues because of the way Western medicine, the way it works, and because of the scientific method, which makes it excellent at dealing with acute problems. It also poses problems when we're dealing with chronic issues because Western medicine looks at a symptom and looks to cure the symptom. And it does so by focusing itself on the symptom and not looking at the body and the mind as a whole. And when you look at the human organism, it's all one. So your mind, your body, your emotions, all these things interact and affect each other, and they're all very important. And when it comes to chronic illness, there isn't, if I have high blood sugar, I may be able to take a pill that can lower my blood sugar, but we're not dealing with why. Like, why do I have high blood sugar? Or why am I insulin resistant? Or why am I developing diabetes? It would be great if I had a medicine that could make the diabetes, kind of control it so it doesn't kill me. But if we don't identify what's causing it in the first place, we're going to bankrupt ourselves. The Western societies will absolutely bankrupt because that's really literally the direction we're going. Now, when it comes to carbohydrates, you have 3 macronutrients that are found in food. So you have micronutrients, which are your vitamins and minerals, and foods have a lot of things in them, many that we've identified and many that we haven't identified. And I also want to say that of all the things that we know of in the universe, the 2 most complex things that we know of are the brain, the human brain, and how it derives consciousness, and the human metabolism or mammalian metabolism. It's extremely complex. How we can eat something and take food and convert it into energy, and how we can build cells and build tissue. Very, very complex. We understand what we know about it, but there's a lot that we don't know, and there's stuff that we don't know that we don't know. And when it comes to food, there's a lot of things in food and the way that those things interact with each other and how they interact with the environment and how they interact with the human body and the context of the human body when we're eating it. And I could go down a list of just all the variables that we know of, and then there's a bunch that we don't know of. So it's extremely complex. So food, very complex, but if we look at the big picture, we can break it down into what are called macronutrients. Those are your proteins, your fats, and your carbohydrates. Now, of those macronutrients, only 2 of them are essential. In other words, you have to eat 2 of them or you will die, and that's fats and proteins. Your body needs to eat fats in order to sustain itself, and you need to consume proteins in order to consume itself. That is not true of carbohydrates. You could go for the rest of your life without ever eating a carbohydrate, and you'll be just fine. So that's one thing that we want to take note of. The second thing is, why? We got to ask ourselves why. Why did the human body evolve to not require carbohydrates to survive and to live. And that's because carbohydrates in nature aren't super accessible, nor are they super plentiful. If you walked around in nature, we're talking pre-agricultural revolution, you're just walking around, it's going to be pretty rare to find, fruit growing somewhere or some vegetables just randomly growing somewhere or just carbohydrates in general. They're relatively rare. Now, when we did encounter them, we probably found a lot of them and we probably ate the hell out of them, but we probably went long periods without any carbohydrates at all. And, on that note, we probably went long periods without any food at all, but carbohydrates in particular. And that's important to know because we probably evolved in that type of a context where we would go for long periods of time without any carbohydrates whatsoever. And we find that when humans eliminate carbohydrates from their diet, not only are there no detrimental effects for most people, and of course individuals can vary quite a bit, but in some cases there's therapeutic benefits. For example, people with neurological disorders seem to do excellent on a no carbohydrate diet because the body runs off of something called ketones, which it makes from fats, and those ketones seem to be protective in the case of neurological type issues. So that all being said, if you eat carbohydrates, they do provide you with a very fast, quick burning source of energy. It is, scientists will say it's a preferred source of energy. And that's because when you in the presence of carbohydrates, your body will burn those first before it goes to converting fats into ketones. It just prefers it. If you're an athlete and you're involved in anything that involves any type of explosive activity or strength, carbohydrates are probably better to consume. Studies will show that, you can compete in basketball and in explosive weightlifting and stuff like that without carbs, but you're probably going to perform better if you eat those carbohydrates because they produce explosive force a little bit better off. Now, the same is not true necessarily for long duration endurance type activities. So if you're going to go on long walks or hikes or low intensity jogging or rowing or swimming, and you were going to just do it for a long period of time, in that particular scenario, you're probably going to run better off of ketones because you store so many of them in the form
ketones.
of
Just quickly explain. Sorry, mate, to interrupt. Ketones. Explain real quick what that is, just for listeners.
Ketones are the energy that your body will. So your body will take fat, convert it, or turn it into something called a ketone, which then your body will use for energy. When it comes to carbohydrates, your body will take a carbohydrate, turn it into glucose, and then your body uses that glucose. Your body can store maybe 3,000 to 6,000 calories worth of glucose at any given moment, which you can burn out after 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of activity. A lean athlete will store probably up to 30,000 calories worth of ketones. So you can see that would be much better source of energy if you're going to go long duration. Now, that all being said, I want to be clear. You can overeat anything. I know you already said that. Anything can be overeaten. But we tend to, in modern societies, really, and I'm being very simplistic because there's a lot here that we need to unpack, but we do tend to overeat carbohydrates. When you eat carbohydrates, they tend to stimulate the appetite in people, probably because again, we evolved in the context of, where carbs were rare, and when we found them, we eat the hell out of them. So they stimulate appetite, but now that we have carbohydrates available whenever, we tend to overeat them. Carbohydrates in the form of grains have a great long shelf life. So processed foods, packaged foods tend to be higher in carbohydrates. They just store for a long period of time. Then when you go further and you look at highly processed foods, most of the money that goes into creating those foods goes into creating a food that is very palatable, highly palatable foods or hyper palatable foods. That means foods that really taste really, really good. They hit those sensors in your brain that tell you that this tastes really good. And they're engineered by scientists to hit on these buttons way more than food in nature ever could. You got, salty with sweet and the texture and the smell and all these different things that you would never find in nature in that combination. And they create an environment where you just crave the fuck out of them, and you eat them, and you don't get full on them until much later versus eating foods that are in their natural form where you'll hit what's called palate fatigue where, you'll eat a bunch of it and you'll be like, ooh, I don't want to eat anymore. But processed foods, they go a lot further. You can eat a whole bag of chips. You could eat a bunch of cookies and eat well beyond that where you would normally find yourself stopping. So, with knowing all, and then of course the way the body uses carbohydrates and how insulin needs to get released in order to take that sugar and utilize it as energy. And if you just keep hammering your body with insulin, it starts to adapt by becoming more resistant to insulin. So then you increase your amount of insulin that you push out. And this cycle continues on and on until, 10, 15 years down the line, your body stops responding to insulin and now you have diabetes. So that's where I think carbohydrates can start to play or has played a role in modern societies in our health epidemics. But I won't say carbs are the problem or the enemy. It's really quite complex, and there's a lot
more factors that come into it, right?
Oh, there's so much that goes into it, and we're really just starting to learn. I mean, you have, of course, the obvious, don't overeat. If you eat more calories than you burn, you're going to store body fat. But it gets so much deeper. I mean... Yeah,
thank you. And whilst you're talking about that, this wasn't actually on my little list of questions, but it's infuriating the hell out of me now because there's so many coaches out there and stuff who are building successful businesses, and hats off to them. And a lot of them, they've got the right idea, but then they're just really just blown out of proportion when it comes to calories. Just stay in a calorie deficit and you'll get leaner. And they're really not delving deep enough into how important nutrients are. We all know how complex the gut is. And I think, Sal, if possible, we could maybe in the future do a whole episode on gut health and gut flora and stuff, because I don't really want to go into that because it's so complex. I just think there's so much to talk about with what you've experienced with gut health and myself as well. But, there's a lot more to just kind of eating. Obviously, as you said, then, the bottom line is people are overeating calories, right? So they're eating more than they need. They're probably not moving enough. And then all the rest of it, they might not be sleeping enough, whatever else they're doing, which is detrimental to their health. But there's a lot more to it, right, Sal, than stay in a calorie deficit and you lose body fat and get healthy.
If it was as simple as it's just need to be in a calorie deficit, don't overeat. If it was that simple, we wouldn't have a problem. 100%. We would not have a problem. We wouldn't have an obesity epidemic. Now you have to ask yourself, how in the hell can the body continue to push itself to become sicker and sicker? Now remember, the human body, the human organism, its goal is to survive and procreate. Okay, that's what it does. It evolved to do that. So then why would your body continue to push you to eat more and more and more and eat these foods, and you find yourself sicker and sicker and sicker, or more and more obese, or whatever you want to call it? How could that possibly happen? What the fuck is going on here? And if it was as simple as calories, we would fix it. The problem with that is we're ignoring a lot of the psychology that goes behind it. Number one, we have completely hijacked our body's signals. For sure, if your body was in a normal state, if the foods that you ate were natural, and your body was able to understand what it was eating, if your body was able to send out the right signals to tell you when to stop eating, when you need to eat, when you need all these different things, you wouldn't see nearly a problem. We have hijacked those signals. We've hijacked them with the food that we've eaten, and it's not just about calories. It's about everything else that's in the food. Now, from a physical standpoint, a lot of what's in our food can make us gain weight and make us unhealthy. We could talk about how artificial sweeteners affect the microbiome, which then can contribute to insulin sensitivity. We could talk about
microbiome. Just really quickly, what is that for the listeners?
Oh, these are all the bacteria that live in your gut. And if you were to add up every bacterial cell, they would outnumber human cells on you by 3 to 1 at the minimum. So you're more bacteria than you are human, and your bacteria. I
remember you saying, yeah.
Oh, and your bacteria plays a massive role in your health and how you think and how you digest food. It is a part of your body's function. It should be considered another organ, if you ask me. But yeah, if glyphosates, these are herbicides that are all over genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. So they spray them all over food to kill the weeds. You eat some of these residues, they act like antibiotics in the body, so they start to kill your microbiome. They damage your gut lining. I could go down the list.
What kind of food, Sal? Sorry to interrupt you.
No
what
problem.
kind of foods would you say would people actually consume these glyphosates from them? I know you say plants, but what? Is it veg in general, or is it more kind of what kind of food?
So in the U.S. In particular, unless it says it's organic, I don't know, corn, probably 80 to 90% of it is genetically modified. So what they've done is they've modified the corn in a laboratory to be able to handle an herbicide. So you could spray this corn with this herbicide and it won't die. So this is great because now you can plant your corn, spray your whole field with herbicide, kill the weeds, and your corn is fine. Meanwhile,
so they've altered the DNA. They've actually altered the DNA and the genetics of the plant then, really.
Correct.
To do that, yeah?
Oh, yeah. They'll take a gene from a bacteria or from a fish or something, put it in this corn, and boom, it now survives being sprayed with this herbicide. So they'll spray entire crops with it, and you're eating this residue when you eat this corn, and that residue, that glyphosate, over a period of time, depending on your exposure, can cause problems. So our food is causing a lot of problems in our body, and they just stop working. So now your hunger signals, what you're eating, when you're eating, how you feel, like it's all being altered. So to say that it's as simple as calories is ridiculous. I mean, look around. When you've got, 50% of the average American is overweight, and we've got sickness everywhere. And I say overweight because it's so easy to see. You can see that people are just fat, right? Most people who are fat don't want to be fat. Okay, most people don't want to walk around overweight who are overweight. If it was easy as just eat less calories, it would be no problem. But the food that we're eating stimulates our hunger in ways that that normal, natural, whole foods don't do. We end up overeating. They affect our microbiome. They affect our hormones, and so it's just a perfect storm of just terrible health coming from our food. Then you add on top of that inactivity and all those other things. So you have to count that all in, because to say it's all about the calories and to ignore the fact that food can change your behavior, change your cravings, can change how you feel. If I eat a cupcake that has the same calories and macronutrient breakdown as, a plate of whole natural foods, they may have the same macro breakdown, they may have the same calories, but I'm going to feel different. They taste different. They affect me differently. That will have an effect on me, both physically and emotionally, and as I go about the rest of my life. So you have to take all that into account. Otherwise, we'll never solve this problem.
Great. Thanks a lot, man. That was awesome. And whilst we are talking about this now, I might as well go into sweeteners. Might as well drop this gem for the listeners, because there's lots of new studies coming out and stuff, and it's taken them a long time, as it always does, to get conclusive kind of long-term studies. And most of the studies are done in rats. I'm aware of that, but they seem pretty efficient to me. Based on what I've heard recently, there's a podcast I listen to called ATP Science. They're guys based out here in Australia, and two of them are nutritionists, and they really do know their stuff. And a recent one I listened to, because I know you guys kind of made me a lot more self-aware and mindful of artificial sweeteners and what they do to your gut, and effectively what they do to your body, and the kind of effect they can have on you. So, for example, I used to, much like yourself back in the day, I used to take a lot of supplements, a lot of protein supplements and whatnot, which were laden with artificial sweeteners and coloring dye and whatnot. And I'm pretty sure, that combined with the unhealthy relationship I had with food, I was binge eating a bit here and there, definitely have done a bit of damage to my gut somewhere along the line, because I do get issues on quite a regular basis, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it is. But anyway, before I go off onto that, sweeteners. So artificial sweeteners such as I think it's Ka-sulfame, if that's how it's pronounced, and aspartame and sucralose. Those kind of. Okay, let's just talk about Ka-sulfame and aspartame, for example. For example, when you have an artificial sweetener, as far as I'm aware, this actually tricks your brain into thinking it's getting sugar, right? So the body then the brain will get the signal to release insulin. So it's kind of like, in a sense, having sugar, but you're not getting the calories. So you're not getting the benefits from, or you're not actually getting any calorie or nutritional benefits, but you're still spiking the insulin. Now, I've heard also aspartame and K-sulfame in particular. The new studies are telling us that it actually stuffs up the BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which can cause free radicals in the brain. And the studies they've done on rats, they found that it affects the is it the hippocampus part of the brain? If that's how it's pronounced, the part which controls, which is responsible for memory. And they found that also it only took about up to 4 weeks to completely adjust and kill a lot of the good bacteria in the gut and completely adjust the microbiome in the rats. So obviously these artificial sweeteners are they're doing something to us. So if you could just give us a quick insight, because I know you guys are kind of, in a sense, anti-artificial sweeteners, and you're very mindful and self-aware of what they are. So if you can give us a heads up on that, Sal.
Sure. So the message that we're told a lot with artificial sweeteners is that they're inert. That you can consume this and then it goes straight through your body and there's no effect on you whatsoever, which is totally false. Anything you consume that can go through your gut wall or whatever, or even just on your gut wall, will have an effect on you. Anything, water, food, sweeteners, you name it, it's going to have some kind of an effect. So first and foremost, they are not inert. They are not nothing. There's something. The second thing to consider is when these sweeteners were tested and approved, we only tested them for what we knew to test them for. At the time, we had very little knowledge and understanding of the importance of the microbiome on human health. So we didn't even test that. We had no idea to test for something, therefore that testing never happened. Now we know that the microbiome is extremely important and plays a tremendous role in everything from mental health to physical health. The other thing too is the flavor of sweet. That is a signal in the body. And when you constantly hammer the signal of sweet, your body will adjust how it perceives sweet. And so what I mean by that is, if I'm always eating a lot of sweet tastes, whether it's artificially sweetened or sugar, I will perceive other foods to be more bland. And if there's any bodybuilders or competitors listening, they know that post-competition, when they've been super strict, that even a strawberry will taste like the sweetest candy that they've ever had. So it does change how you start to perceive food, and it can encourage you to eat more. In fact, there's lots of studies showing that people who consume artificial sweeteners actually will end up eating more as a result. So you may think you're saving calories by not consuming 200 calories worth of soda, but because you're consuming that sweet taste, which is a signal that your brain perceives, people end up eating more food anyway. There's also the implications of the cronyism that went into getting these things passed in the first place. If you look at the real history of how aspartame became, legalized in the U.S., it's fucking hilarious. It is absolutely hilarious. It is.
Enlighten me, Sal.
It is. The cronyism involved was just phenomenal. I mean, chemical companies were trying to get this thing pushed through. A lot of backdoor deals were made. They couldn't get enough votes, so they kicked someone off the panel, put another person on that they wanted. And it's just, you got to read into it. It's a long story, but it's pretty hilarious. When it first did get passed through, when people would call to complain about, issues with food, aspartame was in its own category. Well, they eliminated that because that became the number one complaint. People would call and say, I'm getting headaches, I'm getting this, I'm getting that. And so they cut it out it's a huge market. They have massive influence on our food. The chemical manufacturers that make them have massive influence. So it's just one of those things. But as far as health is concerned, I want to be very clear. Powders and bars and whatever are not health food. They're not. They're highly processed. Even the healthiest ones, because I'll have one every once in a while, and I'll make sure it's organic. I'll make sure it's not artificially sweetened, which makes it better. But it's still a highly processed version of food. And real food, real whole food, is superior in many ways. And so I always tell people, go for whole natural foods over things that are processed anyway. But when it comes to artificial sweeteners, you have the potential for excitotoxicity in the brain that can start to cause problems in the brain. You have adverse effects, which are actually quite common with a lot of these artificial sweeteners. You have how it damages the gut. Once you start to damage the gut, you can create the environment for increased food intolerances, for hormonal disruptions, for inaccurate hunger signals, as we talked about earlier. So you're betting now. To be clear, again, if you eat, if you have a Diet Coke here and there, probably not going to harm you. But if you are somebody who's into fitness and you have your pre-workout before your workouts, you have 1 or 2 shakes a day in a bar, you chew sugar-free gum most days, and you add that up over 10, 20, 30 years, probably not doing your body any favors. You're probably going to cause some problem with yourself. In some animal studies in high doses, these things are carcinogenic. Now, I know humans don't necessarily consume those same types of doses, but, I don't know of any rat studies that last, 50 years or whatever. I don't know of any human studies that last that long. And
exactly, long-term studies, just like you said before, Sal, about like tobacco, isn't it? I remember you saying on the podcast, they didn't have initially any conclusive studies on that, and then obviously, 20 years down the line or whatever, as we all know, they came to realize, tobacco is not the best for you. So, you know what I mean? I know it's a bit, that's a rubbish kind of comparison, but you see what I mean? It's
actually a great comparison. If you look at the tobacco industry and how corrupt they were with hiding some of the stuff that they knew, and how they had scientists conduct studies and, put these studies out, and, smoking does not cause cancer. I mean, they said that so many times. Scientists were, they were testifying that it doesn't cause cancer, and it was ridiculous. When you look at artificial sweeteners, I don't think it's going to hurt you in 3 months. I really don't. But I do think that they can cause problems over a long period of time. And if you're a health and fitness person and you really want to optimize your life with your health and fitness, just eliminate them. You're not missing much. You can go with, sweetened products that are sweetened with things like stevia, which is probably a better alternative, or just, like I said, go with the whole natural foods, and you'll find that after a short period of time, you're not going to even desire some of those artificially sweetened products.
And when you say whole natural foods, right, because I always try and break down how I define whole natural foods, just reel off a few foods that have, that you consume on a regular basis, which has really helped you get your health to an optimum state and whatnot. What would you say? Well, when you say whole foods.
Whole natural foods are, foods that run, swim, fly, grow on a tree, grow on the ground, that require minimal processing in order to be consumed, that are relatively unadulterated, or at least not modified in a laboratory. So I know we've bred fruits and vegetables for a long time to and change the way they look and stuff, but I'm talking about the way we alter them in a laboratory, only because then they're sprayed with a bunch of other things and you end up consuming these residues. But just foods that are real, and not something that comes out of a box or that has a long shelf life. Those are not whole natural foods. Now, can they sustain you? Yeah, they can, and they technically are food. But we didn't evolve with those kinds of foods available to us, and so they change how we behave, what we crave, how we feel in ways that aren't beneficial. So if
I'm pretty sure. Oh, sorry, mate.
No problem. No, continue.
Yeah, so sorry to interject, but yeah, on the note of sweeteners, after listening to you guys talk about, they're not ideal for the body and stuff, back in the day when I first started tuning in to the MindPump podcast, I decided to eliminate. I gradually just got rid of supplements, and then I eliminated sweeteners altogether. I think didn't have any sweeteners for, I think it was about 4 weeks or something, but then I started having them occasionally. But as you say, it's not going to kill you having some here and there. But it did definitely transform my relationship with food, and the cravings that I used to get for certain foods, like rubbish foods, reduced drastically. I didn't really change anything when it comes to my carbohydrate intake, and I was still having simple sugars here and there, but mainly kind of like whole foods, like fruit and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But it definitely did change the game for me when I eliminated sweeteners in terms of my cravings and the kind of foods that I would go for intuitively now without thinking about it. Don't involve stuff which come out of package, whereas it was definitely a big part of my of my daily diet, really, artificial foods. So and it did help me massively.
And the fitness industry is fueled by the supplement industry, which produces a lot of revenue in the fitness industry. Supplements sell, quite a bit. It's a $1 billion industry. Many of them, most of them, and it's starting to change now because consumers are starting to want different things, but most of them are flavored artificially. So you're not going to get a lot of information from the fitness industry that's going to tell you that artificial sweeteners are bad. They'd be killing their revenue. And now you ask yourself why? Why are there so many artificial sweeteners in supplements? Well, I'll tell you why. Because if you're going to drink a protein powder where they've taken protein and they've dried it and turned it into something that's got a shelf life of 5 years, and it needs to be palatable, because if you've ever had pure protein powder that's unflavored, it tastes like absolute shit. So
rancid.
Rancid. Of course they're going to add, artificial sweeteners. They want to, because if you make something taste good, we know that consumers are going to buy it. So now the good news is supplement companies, a lot of them are starting to come out and they're starting to be natural, organic, non-artificially sweetened. But 15 years ago, I couldn't find any. I could not find a single protein powder or bar that was not flavored artificially. They were all complete garbage. Today, you can start to see that there's a lot of. one of the companies that were sponsored by Organifi, none of their stuff is artificially sweetened. Companies like that didn't exist before. So I am hopeful. I am seeing the industry start to shift a little bit in the direction of things that are better for our health. And not
I use
just
those products as well. Sorry once again, mate. Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
I use I started using Organifi as well because I couldn't, obviously after you guys mentioned it and stuff and said you were using it, and it being natural sweeteners, and you're getting quite nutrient dense supplements there, really, gram for gram with Organifi, but I can't really find any on the same sort of level here in Australia. So I still take Organifi supplements, and I've got a few clients as well, particularly the ones who don't really get enough greens in and stuff in order to kind of compensate for that. And I really do like Organifi supplements, to be fair. And as you say, it's like you were saying earlier, just one more little thing on sweeteners. You were saying stevia, and I've heard is it erythritol as well is a decent one? Yeah, erythritol and stevia. It
can cause stomach upset in some people. Yeah. And here's the thing with sweeteners. Again, your best bet is just to avoid all of them and just to eat. A protein powder is a poor replacement for a meal, and a green powder is a poor replacement for vegetables. Now, in the context of modern life, if it's something you're lacking, if you like to enjoy yourself, sometimes I like to make smoothies and I'll add it in there. Then go for. Or if you're a competitor and you need to push protein a little bit and you find it difficult to eat, extra protein without getting other, tons of calories from other things, then protein powder is good. But I recommend people tend to just avoid them in general. But if you're going to eat them, you're better off going with something that's naturally sweetened, because it's not going to have, or at least it's not as likely to have the negative effects on things like your gut microbiome.
Cool. So I've literally got one or two more questions for you before we wrap this up.
Sure.
And I had a massive list, but I'm not going to get through them. I'm happy just to get the most important ones done.
Sure.
So one of them was let's talk training, right? So talking about groundbreaking results for me. As I said briefly at the start, when I done your Red Maps program, completely. The results I had instantly from using the concepts that you applied, such as just stimulating the muscles more frequently, by hitting the whole body and working the body parts more often, essentially, rather than doing split routine training where I would be hitting, one body part each time. So I'd be doing like chest one session, legs another session, and then spending most of the week recovering, using the way you programmed your plans and doing the whole body. And then doing, for example, hitting my weak body parts in the days in between, and the adaptation thing as well, where it would be split into, strength, hypertrophy, and pump adaptation. So split into 3 different phases. So just explain to the listeners what, the most effective way to train, because I've, as I said to you before, Sal, I've actually created my own program now using the concepts and taking some ideas from the Mind Pump plans, but putting my own twist on it and added some different things on there based on what I've learned. And what are the most effective ways to train? And if you could just elaborate on the importance of mobility, because that's another thing which was hugely transformational for me, was mobility and actually, focusing on lengthening out my tight muscle groups and priming myself prior to each workout. So if you could just brush through the importance of mobility and the most effective way to train as far as lifting weights goes and building lean muscle.
Yes. Okay, so when we look at exercise, or in particular resistance training or lifting weights, you want to understand that resistance training provides, what it basically does is it sends a signal to the body, and that signal tells the body to adapt. So when I lift weights, I can cause some muscle damage. I can stress my body out a little bit. I push my body a little bit. My body sees this and then tries to adapt so that next time the same stress or the same weight lifted or the same whatever I just did doesn't cause the same amount of damage or the same amount of stress. Really no different than, your skin getting darker as you go out into the sun to try to adapt to be able to handle more UV rays. Your body literally is adapting so that you can become stronger and more resilient to the same kind of, training you did before. So understanding that, when we train people, when people work out, they think of it as the workout itself is what's causing muscle building, which is false. We also confuse recovery with adaptation. So we think to ourselves, oh, I'm sore. Let me wait till my body recovers, and then I'm going to hit it again. And then that means that my body, when I recovered, I got stronger or I built more muscle. Not true. In fact, recovery and adaptation are two separate things. So I can hit my muscle really hard on Monday and still be sore on Wednesday, but by Wednesday, the muscle building signal has now dropped considerably, and even though I'm still sore. So if you're going to the gym and you're lifting weights and you're trying to build muscle, what you want to pay attention to is the muscle building signal. You want to pay attention to adaptation. You're not looking at necessarily recovery, although recovery is an important factor to pay attention to. Really, it's all about adaptation. Now, we know in studies that when a muscle is stressed with a workout, the muscle building signal that they measure, which is they measure it through something called protein synthesis, it peaks at about 24 to 48 hours. In other words, if I work out Monday, on day 1 or 2 after my workout, that's the highest or level of muscle building that I'm going to get. After that, it starts to drop considerably. It makes no sense to wait an additional 4 days to hit that muscle group. In fact, if I wait an additional 3 or 4 days, that signal will not only drop, but then my body will start to adapt in the opposite direction, and I'll start to lose some of that muscle adaptation. And for people who don't believe me, I can offer up this challenge right here. Go to the gym, work out your legs as hard as you possibly can, then go home, lay in bed, and don't move for a full week. Lay in bed for a full week. And I promise when you'll get out, you'll have less muscle and less strength. You'll be totally recovered. Muscles will be fine, no more soreness because you didn't move at all, but you would have lost muscle and strength. So knowing this, it makes more sense to hit the body more frequently. So rather than hitting each body part once a week, you're better off hitting each body part between 2 to 4 days a week. Studies back this up. They've actually compared workouts head to head in several studies where they'll take, 2 groups of men. One group will work, do 15 sets per body part once a week. The other group will do 5 sets per body part, but do it 3 days a week. Same total volume. Everything else is the same. In other words, the group that did it 3 days a week, they're doing 5 sets 3 days a week, so they're doing a total of 15 sets. The other group is doing 15 sets, but they're only doing it once a week. The group that does the more frequent workouts always builds more strength and more muscle. So frequency is very important. It's also important to note that training to absolute crazy intense failure probably detrimental, especially when you realize that you want to train more frequently. It's not a good idea to go in on a Monday and completely devastate your legs, because then you can't hit them again on Wednesday. You got to wait that full week to recover, but in the meantime, that muscle building signal is gone. So reduce the intensity a little bit. You still want to work out hard. You just don't want to kill yourself in the gym. Take your total volume, divide it by 3, hit your body parts 3 times a week, and you'll get far, far better results. Now, in terms of mobility really is the range of motion that you have in a particular joint that you have control over. So it's not just the range of motion, but it's the control of that range of motion. So I'll give you an example. You could have somebody who's super limber, who can really just get in the splits or, touch their toes really well, really flexible. But if they don't have good control over that range of motion, they're still unstable. They can still cause themselves injury. If they go into that deep stretch and then they try to lift something, boom, they pull a muscle or they hurt themselves. So mobility is just increased range of motion, but control within that range of motion. Now, working on mobility will help you build more muscle, because we know that as you train muscles in larger and longer ranges of motion, you get a better response from adaptation. We know that full reps build muscle more effectively than short reps do. So it makes sense to improve your mobility so that you can do deeper squats with better control, so that you can do exercises like behind the neck shoulder presses, which a lot of people can't do because they don't have the shoulder mobility, so that you can get into these long ranges of motion and really stimulate muscle growth because you have control over these long ranges of motion. And lastly, the strength that you gain from your training is relatively specific to the range of motion that you train them in. In other words, if I only ever go down to parallel in my squats and I get really strong going down to parallel, I'll have a little bit of carryover to a full squat, but not much. You could take somebody who could squat 400 pounds down to parallel, and I'll guarantee you that they won't be able to squat 350 all the way down to the floor. You just take 50 pounds off and they still can't go all the way down to the floor. That's how much of a difference it makes, just that extra 3 inches. So mobility and working in those new ranges of motion, or giving you ranges of motions you can work in, now you're getting more functional with your strength. Now you're getting stronger and deeper ranges of motion. And now when you go out in the real world, you're a much more functional individual, and you're not like these bodybuilders who build all this muscle and go to the beach and throw a Frisbee and throw their shoulder out, which is more common than you realize.
I think you nailed that one, Sal. Wish I got my notepad out there, mate. Awesome. One more question for you, Sal. Literally one more before we wrap it up, and it's a bit different. This one, it's taking a little bit of a diversion, but I want to get this one in there. So what would you tell your younger self to do differently, Sal? Because looking at your journey and stuff, you started off like myself. I've been a trainer for over a decade now. You've been within the fitness industry for like over 20 years. I believe you've run your own studio, your own gym. You've managed plenty of gyms as well in the past. Probably trained, thousands of people and whatnot. And you've as far as your eating habits, your health, aesthetics, all this kind of stuff, you seem to be at the top of your game now. But just generally, I mean, once again, I'm going off on a tangent again. I think I had a bit too much coffee before this, Sal. I've realised. I'm just banging on now. But anyway, what would you tell your younger self to do differently? And that was a question.
So if I could go back in time, I would. There's a few things I'd tell myself in terms of training. I would tell myself to avoid supplements completely. No need to take them all. I'd save myself. God, by this point, I'd be a millionaire, I think, if I had saved all the money that I spent on supplements. I'd probably would save a lot of my. I probably would have a lot better gut health. I've had some gut health issues in the past, and pretty sure that played a large role. So I'd say, listen, avoid all supplements, eat real food, and train your whole body 3 times a week, and stick with that. And you'll be a lot better off than you are now, following all these other programs and taking all these pills and powders.
Boom. Thanks a lot, Sal. So that's a wrap.
Thank you, sir.
Man. It was awesome having you on, man. Honestly, amazing.
No problem.